activists in other states to kind of really help with that. We connected with a Washington organizer she's going to help run like our Washington and Oregon and Idaho states. And then, yeah, we're looking to kind of make more connections. There's some tools that we've been using to help kind of get that info. But yeah, I think that as far as expanding to 50 states, that's where it'll be really helpful to get more input from people on the ground to help us make sure we're covering the right bills and making sure we're including all the details that are really important to voters too.
Yeah, and when you talk about each bill and every bill and the thousands of bills, every single one of them has a lot of legal jargon in there. Is there anything that helps people with that?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, so our founder actually has a background in AI. He's worked in that field for a decade or so. And so he has used AI, integrated it into digital democracy projects. So it'll actually help us process the bill text. Because when we had started, we had two legislative coordinators in Florida that were reading through the full bill text and summarizing them. And it was just an near impossible workload. So AI has been really helpful for kind of helping draft like a template summary. And then we're able to have people review that, add any info. And then additionally, we have one of our newest features. It's called VoteBot. And on each of the bills, it's preloaded with the bill text. So individual voters can use it at any time too. They can ask questions like, why was this bill filed? What does this mean? How does this impact such details? So that's a way for the bot can give direct responses about the bill. And another way I like to use it too, well, we're also pulling, like kind of scraping the web for stances organizations take on bills, displaying those too. So I like to ask VoteBot, like, why did this organization oppose this bill and kind of get some more insight on the bill too. And it can search the web, kind of pull citations too. So it's a really great way to help any voter really get more info about the bill and get that insight knowledge too. That's really difficult, and breaking down that legal jargon too that's not really made to be accessible to everyday voters.
Right, because in a sense, if that tool or that way of the way you're doing it wasn't there, you might lose people may lose interest in the idea of looking at bills. And then I got to ask a question because in Florida, we seem to have a lot of constitutional amendments on the ballot. It seems like I've come to the realization that literally it takes about $20 million to get an amendment on the ballot, and yet and still we're still at 7 or 8 every election cycle. So I don't know where the $150 million comes from every 2 years, but it comes and it happens. Are you covering constitutional amendments as well?
Yeah, that's a good
Statewide?
topic. Yeah, so Florida, I know there were recent ones that were kind of where the citizens gathered the petitions to get it onto the ballot. And those we hadn't covered because we're usually always tying like a bill to how the legislators are voting. And in a citizen-led constitutional amendment, especially the voters are the ones at election time that are able to determine if the bill passes or not. So, kind of what we're doing is expanding what's happening in a constitutional amendment to every piece of legislation. So, however, though, in Virginia, they had some that the legislature they passed through session. They voted on it to get it onto the ballot for voters to then weigh in on. So we have the mid-decade redistricting. We covered that one. And then there were three others about like restoring rights, voting rights for felons, people with a felony record, and then marriage equality and the right to reproductive freedom. So those were four that we did cover at the state level in Virginia. And then you can see how all the legislators voted to get those on the ballot. You can see how the voters had voted when we carried them during session, and then we'll see the outcome additionally of how they end up, if they ended up passing, what the vote results are later on in the next election. But yeah, as far as like Florida, that's been really interesting how voters across the state, regardless of party, are weighing in on those issues, focused on the issues, not so much like a party dynamic. So that's been something really interesting that we're excited to be able to kind of expand on that to other bills too.
Well, that's really a necessity because, frankly, whoever is supporting the particular addendum to the Florida Constitution and whoever is not, they create a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Propaganda on both sides. And really, what we need is clarity. So if
Mhm.
we're able to say, here's this amendment, it was a particular amendment years ago sponsored by a personal injury attorney for legalizing marijuana. And nobody really understood. There was another one about legalizing gambling. And nobody really understood if you were for the amendment, were you for legal marijuana? Were you for bringing back gambling? Nobody even really understood that. And the propaganda from both sides that wanted to see it pass or fail was deceiving as well. So it'd be great to just have a bias organization say, if this particular amendment passes, this is the result of the amendment. And that
Mhm.
was not out there. What was out there was all the talking points and all the pros and all the cons, but not really the idea that if it passed, what's next? And I
Yeah.
think that's really important that we have that at our fingertips now.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like you said, there's a lot of money that goes into it and there's messaging on both sides. So, yeah, like in Virginia with this mid-decade redistricting amendment, there's been like I've seen the emails, the communications about misinformation being spread from one side about even like going as far to say that the governor opposes this, and then the other side having to come back and say like no, she supports this. So, yeah, being able to kind of provide that resource so people can have that nonpartisan, unbiased information, and then using the chatbot tool to be able to ask questions. And then, even additionally, in Arizona, there's I've been learning a lot more about the state at the state level there too. They had, I think it was like 30 potential ballot measures that were kind of going through the legislature that had been introduced. So we had posted about, I think we're up to about 8 or so of those at the, or maybe 10 at the state level that may appear on the ballot. So even in like other states like that, there's way more that people have to kind of figure out, work through, ask questions about that'll appear on their ballot. So, yeah, I think it's super helpful in states like that too.
And you know what's really interesting to me is something Donald Trump once said. He said, if voting were easier, we would never win an election. Imagine if voters were more informed. Who would prevail in that? We don't even know the answer yet, right? Because there has been nothing like this before. But if I found the argument was mail in voting and COVID, and everybody said there was 20 million additional votes because Biden let in 20 million illegal immigrants. And I'm like, I don't really think their first thing on their mind was registering to vote, but I'm not going to argue the point. But now my where I'm landing with this is that when he made that statement, it's true. Generally, there is a consensus that Democrats are lazier than Republicans. And when it comes to, if you see an old lady with a walker and a bottle of water, you can assume, standing in line to vote, you can assume she's a Republican. And, and then comes, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. Granted, there's no reason, there's no documentation on that point. I'm just thinking out loud. But if voters were more informed, this where I'm landing with this, imagine the amount of, especially on these special sessions of Congress, especially on these emergency, what do they call them? Like what if somebody dies and they have an emergency election that the governor in a particular state cannot nominate. It really goes back to an election. I mean, this is just an incredible tool for every voter. And that's why I say we really need to start it from the cradle up. We really need to get the word out to schools and create projects. And if the schools aren't receptive to the idea, how about getting them out to local restaurants? And so leads me to my next question. How is funding? How does that work for you? Do you get paid for this service or is it a 501(c) or how does that all work?
Yeah, so our nonprofit, we have a C3, C4 status, and our team's all volunteers. So we really have like a lot of dedicated supporters that believe in this, that are really helping to make it happen. So it's grassroots funded. We've gotten some grants, and we actually had bipartisan support for funding from the Florida state legislature as a way to get more input from voters to provide that info for legislators and also do a pilot program at the local level, and it made it all the way through the legislature into the budget. And then Ron DeSantis line item vetoed it. So that was, yeah, one source of funding we almost had, but it's definitely a very grassroots organization that's, and a lot of volunteers that are really making this really successful.
So does that beg the question, why did he line item veto? Is it
Yeah, it would have been nice to get an answer, a reasoning for it, but I think we were one of more than a few organizations that got targeted in that. I don't even know what the situation was, but there were a lot of people that got their funding line item vetoed by the governor. But yeah, I wish we had some insight as to why.
I would love to know why, because I just wonder if he's one of them that just doesn't really deliver on his promises and he just doesn't want to be tracked. But
Mhm.
I guess we may never know the answer to that question, but it's an incredible initiative, and I hope you get. I think you're going in the perfectly in a great direction. You're going to wind up with the funding. I think there's, and like you said, then that there's the grants and stuff. But what else? What other areas could you expand in this particular approach?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a really unique tool where it applies to not only individual voters, but also organizations. I feel like it can help with their organizing, like within their engagement within their